Forkers, welcome back to Art the Fork. I'm Spoon and I've got an art journal page for you today. The prompt for this page was Holland or flowers. I got it out of a monthly prompt group I belong to on Facebook. I'll link it in the description down below. So to begin with, I'm using my Canson XL Mixed Media pad. I think it's 12 by something or another. I will put the real dimensions on my blog over at ArtTheFork.com. I'm sorry, ArtTheFork.tumblr.com. So the initial stage of this piece is I am taking some text printed tissue paper that I got out of a gift wrap section and adhering it down with matte medium. Now, the text doesn't really say anything specific, really. It's more just the overall feel of having text on the page. But I wanted to make sure your eye didn't try to read the text, since I wasn't planning on really obscuring it all that much. So what I did was instead of adhering it all down as one solid page, which would have been much, much quicker, this is sped up quite a bit, I decided to tear it into random pieces and then layer and all of that all around the page, flipping directions and stuff as I went. So once I get all the tissue paper adhered, I pull off the excess, make sure everything's good and stuck down, and then give it a blast with my heat gun before moving on, just to make sure that everything doesn't move. And I did have to kind of pick it up to be able to reach that upper edge there. Okay, so for this next step, I am going to be stenciling through this Punchinella stencil that I got in a big pack from Michael's, I think. I'm going to be using a sort of seafoam green, bluish, teal color. And I'm just using a stenciling brush that I got in a pack of foam brushes, again at Michael's. They're pretty cheap. I like the stenciling brushes just because they make it really easy to push the color through the stencil. You get a much cleaner impression this way than from using a regular brush or your standard foam brush. So I'm concentrating on the outer edges of my page, but not looking for a perfect border or anything like that. Just kind of going randomly in random widths and that kind of thing all around the outside of the page. Okay, so after I finished putting on the border, I realized that I needed a little bit more contrast. So I chose a little bit darker blue, which you'll see in a minute ties back into my focal image for the piece. So I didn't clean my brush in between the colors because I wanted them to sort of self-blend. And I'm just going right back over the same areas that I put the original color on, just adding, that extra layer of interest and filling in some of the kind of blanker spots in my original border. this page for a while and could not figure out what to do with it, so I did what I normally do when I get blocked in the middle of a page. I changed my perspective by flipping the page upside down. This is one of the things I really recommend if you get stuck. Flip it upside down, turn it landscape rather than portrait, and usually you can find your way out that way. Finally, I decided to use a hexagon stencil, kind of almost honeycomb in a way, and a coppery paint. Didn't clean my brush out perfectly, so there is a little blue in the initial passes with this hexagon stencil. I actually ended up kind of liking it, and actually kind of wish that the initial passes hadn't been right around where I was planning on putting my focal image, because I wish you could see more of it in the final page. But I'm just adding these hexagons sort of randomly to help fill up some of that middle space, because I realized that my focal image wasn't going to cover the entire middle there. Once I'm happy with the amount of hexagons, I go ahead and pull out my focal image. Now, this is an image I colored many, many years ago. When I am dealing with images, whether they be magazine pages, old calendar pages, tags, or even coloring pages, I will go ahead and cut them out and just store them in a box. Having them pre-cut really takes the sort of busy work out of collaging and makes me a lot more likely to use collage in my mixed media work. So I'm just using matte medium and just using my fingers to spread it out and make sure I get full coverage. I think I've mentioned before in some other videos that I just really don't tend to use brushes unless I need them. For like stenciling or something like that. If I can do it with my fingers, I'm probably going to do that. I feel like it just makes me more connected with my work. Now, my image did get a little bent up in storage, but I was pretty okay with there being some creases in it as long as I got it to adhere down. But because it was so bent, I did really make sure I put on a really good coat of matte medium. Now, with matte medium, unless you are looking for something to really absorb, you don't have to worry about excess because it will dry clear. But the places where the matte medium is are going to absorb media, like sprays or something like that, differently than places without any matte medium on there, which can be really fun and interesting. If you're, looking for some texture, you might want to run some just matte medium through a stencil. It won't give you any raised like a modeling paste would, but it will change how your spray absorbs. So it can be really interesting to play with. So after I get everything good and stuck down, I move on to making my focal image feel more a part of the page. One of the biggest tips I can give to new art journalers is to think about making everything feel like a cohesive piece. You can do this by adding some shadowing or even just some ink around the edges of your collage down pages and coordinating colors and whatnot to your piece. It can kind of make it all feel like one solid piece rather than it looking like you just slap something on top of your background. So I'm going to be using Distress ink in Vintage Photo with just a cosmetic applicator sponge. And I concentrate the pigment at first down underneath the cup to just give it some dimension. And then I decide that I really like the way the Vintage Photo impacts the stenciling I did. So I decide to make a border with the Vintage Photo around the edges of the page. And then you'll see me go back in after I've finished the border with some water, because distress inks are water reactive. I end up just spritzing it and then dabbing it away, because I just kind of want the water droplets. I wasn't looking for any kind of really obvious change or anything like that. I just wanted to give it a little more dimension when you look at it close. And I may, in speeding this up to not have it take quite so long of your day, I may have lost the piece where I spray the border there. After I did the border in Vintage Photo, I decided that I wanted something around the cup itself to try and draw your eye to it a little more. So I used peacock feathers to mimic the blue in the cup itself, just around the upper edges of the focal image. It sort of undoes what I did with the shadowing down at the bottom, but in the end, I am really kind of happy with it. I feel like it pulled it into the page nicely, even if it doesn't really accomplish anything in terms of visual perspective. Distress ink is really great if you're not the best at cutting all the white space around your images, or if you're just not in the mood to fussy cut. You can use distress ink or other inks around the edges to get rid of that whiteness. So there I am misting my distress ink work just to kind of get the water droplets into the page and distress it further. Now, because distress ink is water reactive, if I had wanted to apply the distress ink and then put a stencil over and mist the stencil with water, or rub the stencil with a baby wipe, I would have gotten images into that distress ink, but I'm just spritzing it with water and dabbing up the water then to create sort of a I don't want to overuse the word distressed, but just an interesting, not solid character to that ink. I took this part out because I didn't get very good footage of it, but I cut an oval out of some cardstock with my Cuttlebug and a Thinlits die. And now I'm using an alphabet stamp set and some StazOn. And then I'm just using that Amazon gift card there to help me get my words straight. Or at least sort of straight on there. And the sentiment I'm adding to my page says, shit makes the best blooms. I am not a big believer that art journals have to be completely PC. I make these pages for myself, not necessarily for anybody to view them at any certain time. So I tend not to censor myself very much. I feel like art journaling helps me get my emotions out, and I had been facing a lot of adversity lately with planning for the wedding and things not really going the way I wanted and things like that. So I just needed a reminder that even when things are hard or don't go well, good things can come out of that. So after I got my sentiment all put on the oval, I decided to go over the oval with some Vintage Photo just to tie it into the page a little more and not have it be so stark. And you'll see me again mist it with water just to further distress it And it really took me a while to figure out how I wanted to adhere the sentiment to the page, both in terms of where to put it and also how to put it down. I thought about just using matte medium, but I really wanted to set it apart. I didn't want it to feel like a piece of the focal image, if that makes sense. I wanted it to be kind of separated. I wanted it to draw your eye. That's actually why I ended up putting it up in that corner, because I wanted it to have its own separate space, I guess. But don't be afraid to try things out in a lot of different ways, put things down with washi tape, because then you can get them right back up. I end up deciding to adhere my sentiment with some brads. So that tool you see me using is called a brad setter. It's just basically a poke tool on one end, and then the other side, that sort of triangle side, is to help you press down the sides of the brads after you put it through the paper. In punching the hole, I did end up tearing my paper a little bit away from the binding of the journal, but I think it'll really be okay. So I put these bluish brads I got out of I think it was Recollections brad set. I actually got it off Amazon, and as a happy accident, I ordered 1 pack of brads and got 3. In fact, I also got 3 distress inks when I ordered my distress ink from Amazon. So, 3 of those vintage photos. So who knows? Maybe we'll have a giveaway at some point, and I'll give away my extra vintage photos and some extra brads. I toyed with using a different brad on the other side. A brad that's kind of sepia toned and has some text to it, but in the end I decided I wanted to pull in that blue. And what's really cool is the brads are actually light blue sparkly roses. I know that for the prompt, Holland or blooms, it should have probably been tulips, because that's what everybody thinks of for the Netherlands, but I really liked this focal image I had. I liked that teacup, and I liked the pop of color that the roses gave. That's why I didn't cut them out. So I'm just adhering the brad there, and then I didn't like the way that the edges wouldn't sit flat, so I ended up taking some matte medium in addition to the brads just to get everything to sit flat to the page. Don't ever be afraid to mix the way you adhere things, because, it can be really worth it, especially if you think your journal's going to take a lot of abuse, to just make sure everything's really well stuck down. Now, what I'll probably end up doing when I do the page on the back of this, since those brads are there, is collaging down some patterned paper or something before I do my background, so that those brads don't affect it. Or I might decide to leave them if I want something industrial. I haven't decided yet, but I wanted that black of the sentiment not to just be the only black on the page. I didn't like that, so I add some black soot distress ink around the edges of that oval to sort of pull everything together with the page. And I'm just using, again, a cosmetic sponge. You can get the distress ink blender tools, and they have really nice foam ends, but to be honest with you, I didn't like having to buy something special just to be able to put ink on. So here's a picture a little bit closer up of the final product. And I really like the page. I have been lately looking to use like a lot of different techniques on pages, I guess because I'm, shooting videos now, but sometimes simple is the way to go. You can make a really great page with just one or two techniques. Okay, so that's what I have for you today. Thanks for joining me. And I hope you'll subscribe because I put out new videos every Monday and Thursday, though they do tend to come out around midnight because I am a night owl rather than a morning person.